our circumstances, no matter where we are in life, no matter what roles that we're called to, we are called His beloved. And as members of this family of God, we're called to come to the table together. This morning we're going to celebrate communion because that's where Jesus calls us to be with Him. He calls us to the table. He calls us to break bread with one another. And the night that He was with His friends, He got together with them during the Last Supper. And He took the bread, and He broke it, and He blessed it, and He said, "Take this, eat this, and every time you gather, eat this in remembrance of me." In the same way, He took the cup. He gave thanks, He blessed it, He said, "This is the cup of the new covenant of my blood, shed for you and for all people for the forgiveness of sins. When you drink this, do so in remembrance of me." For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do so proclaiming the good news of the gospel. Friends, we celebrate communion at the river. You don't have to be a member here. You just have to proclaim Christ as your Savior. And we're going to invite you to come through the middle aisles here. And we're going to practice by what we call intinction. So you're going to get a piece of bread and you're just going to dip it in the grape juice. And if you are gluten-free, I don't think we have a gluten-free option today, but we'll bless you anyways. So, friends, this is the table of God for the people of God. Come, all is ready. Driving over here, and I said, "You know what? I think it might be me and Sarah and the trash cans, based on how much snow's out there. But it is great to see all of you here this morning. Welcome. If this is your first time here, my name is Pastor Zach. I'm the lead pastor here at the River, and we are so happy for all of you to be here this morning on such a snowy day. Today we're in our third and final week of our series in the book in Philippians. As a church, we've been spending time over the last few weeks reading this book. And the first week, I put out a challenge to the church to spend a little time in this book, reading it from front to back. I hope this has been a fruitful experience for you. I hope this has been an encouraging experience for you. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we've been reading the book of Philippians. It's only 4 chapters, so you can jump in this week. You still got a shot, before Chris is going to give the message next week, you still got a shot of spending time in the book of Philippians for this week. And I would ask you, as you walk through that book this week, to ask God, what is it that you need me to hear in Paul's words in Philippians this week, Lord? And I'd ask you to open yourself up to listening, to hearing what God is putting on your heart, just as you go through this book one more time this week. Today we're going to be jumping into chapter 4 of the letter to Philippians. And in chapter 4, we're going to run into the verse that I had you memorize in week 1, Philippians 4:13. I can do all this through who... Sorry, it's different. It's different. It depends on the version you have. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength, or I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or whatever version of Scripture that you've been looking at. Philippians 4:13. We've been working through that, and today we're going to get there. Philippians 4:13. Some of you have said to me, "Zach, this is like my favorite verse. Like, this is my life verse." When I first started thinking about Christ, when I started asking questions about Jesus, like, this is one of the verses that someone who was discipling me gave to me to help me understand a little bit who Jesus was. And we find it everywhere nowadays. You find it on coffee mugs. You find it on social media. You find it on t-shirts. You find it on T-bows. Like, athletes, they love verses like Philippians 4:13. They wear it under their jersey, or they write it on their shoes, or they put it under their eyes. And Philippians 4:13, just like Tim Tebow, he made it kind of cool. I'm all right with that. Bible verses being kind of cool. But, I look at that and I go, I wonder what Paul was thinking when he put those words down. Like, just putting it under your eyes, like, it sounds great, but is it maybe taken out of context just a little bit? Like, it can't, the Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I mean, it can't mean like all things, right? Like, I can't run through a brick wall with Christ who strengthens me, right? Like, that would not be a good idea. We have physical limitations. I can try to run through that wall, but you can pray as hard as you want. It's probably not going to happen. And it's not that Christ can't do all things, it's just that doesn't make sense in the scheme of what maybe Tim Tebow might be writing under his eyes. I don't know what Tim Tebow's heart looks like when he talks about Philippians 4:13, but many athletes do this. They write verses like Philippians 4:13 on their shoes, and they have t-shirts that they wear under their jerseys. And they're going to say, you know what? With Christ, we're going to dominate today. We're going to win the game because Christ gives us the strength to win this game. But what happens, let me just float this out to you. What happens when the other team has members on that wear something similar? Like, think about the football game tonight. One side, they have, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And the other side, I cannot do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I mean, tonight's not going to end in a tie. I'm fairly confident of that. Does that mean that Christ can't do all things who strengthens me? So we have to look at this verse. And we can't just take it for face value. We can't just take it for what it says. So we're going to take some time and spend some looking through chapter 4 to pull out what Paul was trying to say to us in this verse in Philippians 4:13 and the surrounding verses. Now, if you haven't been here with us during the series, or if you need a refresher, this is what's happening in Philippians. Paul wrote this letter, the Apostle Paul wrote this letter to the church in Philippi. And while he was writing this letter, he was in prison. He was literally chained to a prison guard 24/7. And the people of Philippi planted this church alongside Paul, and we see that in Acts 16. And because they loved Paul, they sent Paul a guy by the name of Epaphroditus to help him give him both an emotional boost and a financial gift. And so they send good greetings to him. They send a gift to him to raise his spirits and to support him. So we're at this part of the letter in chapter 4 where Paul has talked about a lot, but he's basically writing a thank you note to them in chapter 4. So if you have your Bible today, we're in Philippians chapter 4, verse 10. If not, it's going to be up on the screen for you today. Verse 10, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. So Paul's saying here, I know that we've been far apart from one another. Like, I'm not close to you, and the fact that you've sent someone, you've sent a gift to me, I'm appreciative of that. I really am thankful for the gift that you've sent. Then he goes on to clarify his statement. He says, I am not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. So in this verse, Paul is talking about contentment. And throughout his letter so far, we've seen that he talks about joy, he talks about unity, he talks about humility, he talks about living by Christ's example. And in this final section of the letter, he talks about what it means to live a life of contentment, which is a struggle for us today. Because in our culture, we struggle greatly with what it means to live contently. Maybe you agree, and maybe you don't. But I think if you look around yourself, you see that we have a few things that challenge our sense of contentment in our world. The first is our own nature, our human nature. The thing that pulls us toward discontentment is what's happening within us. I can look around myself and I say, I really like your car. Or, man, you make a lot more money than I do. Or, you just have like more stuff than I do, and I just want what you have. This literally just happened to me, not but a few weeks ago. Sarah and I our phones were like on the fritz. We're like, we're going to go to the phone store, like one of my most dreaded things that I have to do. We're going to go to the phone store. And we're there at the phone store, and the guy is great. He's helping us out. And Sarah's like, I really am thinking that we need to upgrade our phones. Like, and I was like, yeah, I just need to step up. I just need a phone that works. And then she goes, no, I really want a phone with a camera. It's like, a phone with a camera? And she's like, yeah, this big phone. Look how nice this camera is. I was like, that's pretty nice. And then all of a sudden, I feel it like starting up inside of me. I'm just like, oh, maybe I need a phone with a camera. Like, I'm going to be jealous of Sarah if I look over on the couch and she's playing with her big phone with a nice camera, and I'm sitting there with like my tiny little phone. I'm like, wait a second, I'm running through my mind. This is all what's happened. This is like welcome to my brain. This is happening to me as I'm standing at the counter, and I just said, I'm going to need a bigger phone too. Because I didn't want to feel like I didn't have what I could have. I moved quickly. I mean, that's literally, you just got into my brain. I moved to a place of discontentment very quickly. I felt like I needed something bigger and something better. Another thing that fuels our discontentment is marketing. Get ready for this one tonight. If you're watching the football game, think about all the commercials. In fact, think about, just for a second, any commercial you could sit here and recite word for word for me. Like, I know each of you could do this. Sarah and I, we sat on the couch the other day, and we were watching one of those Super Bowl commercial specials where they showed you, like, you know, the 50 top commercials or whatever. And, I mean, some of these commercials are like from 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I could recite. It's funny, like Sarah's like, stop it. I was like, I can't help it. I just can recite all of these commercials. And it's not just on TV, it's on the billboards that we pass. It's on magazines or newspapers. Shoot, like we're browsing the internet and ads are popping up left and right. You're on social media, you're on Facebook, and here's an ad for this. You're on YouTube, and all of a sudden you're watching, I hate this. You're watching a video, you know, you're like, oh, this video is really great, this video, and there's like ads starting soon. I'm like, no! But you know what? For 15 seconds they got me because I want to see what's on the other end of that video. I mean, the marketing industry is crazy nowadays. They're everywhere. And they say things, they fuel this discontentment. They say things like, well, you haven't made it unless you drive XYZ car. You haven't made it unless you have this watch or smell like Julia Roberts. You haven't made it. And just think about this, just for a second. Think about this. I know all the guys are like, yeah, I want to smell like Julia Roberts. Just think about this for a second. Tonight, these 30-second ads, they go for $5 million an ad. Companies are paying $5 million an ad to fuel our discontentment. $5 million to show you that your life is meaningless without a bag of Doritos in your hand. Think about that. Another thing that drives our discontentment is the American culture. We live in one of the richest countries in the world. We exist in a time where consumerism is king, where the message to us is we live our best lives when we have something newer and bigger and better. So it's difficult to live a life of contentment in our world today. And that's the backdrop of us reading Philippians this morning. We're going to go back to Philippians to check out how Paul breaks down what it means to live a life of contentment. We're going to go to verse 11. And I need you to read it again, and we're going to check out something that you may have missed the first time. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Paul uses the word learned twice here. And I would lift that up to you. That contentment is a learned condition. Just like our joy, contentment is not based on our circumstances. Contentment for Paul is a learned condition. It's not something that we can easily acquire. It's not something that comes naturally to us. It doesn't come from within us. It's something that's learned over time and experience. And again, like joy, it's not dependent on good times and bad. It's not about our circumstances. Now, it didn't take me long to find a motivational quote on contentment, because I guess being content right now is like hip and trendy. So you just like type in like contentment and like social media just pops up like crazy. Here's a quote I found. Contentment is not the fulfillment of what you want, but the realization of how much you already have. Oh, doesn't that sound great? It's like honey on the lips. You're just like, yeah, I just feel more content just reading it. As we continue, I think I need to help you understand, based on what Paul is saying, what contentment is and what contentment isn't. This morning we're going to spend a few moments pointing out a few categories I think where we've misused and we've misapplied this word contentment. The first of these three categories is the misunderstanding that living a life of contentment means that everything is rainbows and unicorns. Meaning that being content means everything is wonderful. Contentment, that doesn't mean that no matter what, you need to be happy about everything. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be wonderful, that nothing will ever go wrong for you as long as you believe that everything will be all right. You and I, we know this kind of contentment. Maybe you've run into this kind of a contentment, and you hear this, and although you may be in a difficult time of life, you hear rainbows and unicorns contentment. Is that you'll be content if you just put a smile on your face. And everything is going to be better. That you should just be happy to be alive and excited in any and all situations. And to be honest, I'm guilty of living rainbows and unicorns contentment. Just ask Sarah. I'm just like, the glass is half full all the time. Nothing can go wrong. But what I've found is the problem in telling someone that everything is rainbows and unicorns, one, makes me look like a goon, and two, it doesn't help them. It, more than anything else, makes things worse. So, while contentment may look like a life of rainbows and unicorns for some, this is not the kind of contentment that Paul is talking about in chapter 4. Think about Paul for a second. Think about Jesus for a second. They both know contentment really well. They didn't have the rainbows and unicorns disposition on contentment. Think about Paul. He talks about his hardships in 2 Corinthians 12, where he describes this thorn in his flesh. And he's praying for God to remove it from him. It wasn't rainbows and unicorns for Paul. He was in chains. He was in prison. Check it out, 2 Corinthians. This is what he talks about. Three times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. I want you to look at this and see that Paul is not saying that everything is rainbows and unicorns. Life is not great for Paul, but yet he's content. He can be content and at the same time not like where he is. Think about Jesus, who willingly goes to the cross. He wasn't excited about it. In fact, we know this because there's a moment in the garden, the night he was taken into custody. He went away with his friends to the garden and he prayed for God's will to be done in the midst of a difficult situation. Check it out, the Gospel of Matthew. This is what it says. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour, he asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Happiness and contentment are not the same things, friends. Jesus was content in falling in line with the Father's will, but he wasn't excited about it. He wasn't happy about it. So I'd suggest that we have to push against the idea that the feeling of contentment is feeling of happiness or always being excited about life. Another misuse of the idea of contentment is that contentment means receiving a pass to live a life that is easy and lazy. This use of contentment is saying, hey, I've done exactly what I think I'm supposed to have done. I'm just going to put my feet up. I'm just going to take a rest. You have to understand that biblical contentment has nothing to do with living an easy or lazy life. There are a few places in the book of Proverbs that kind of point this out to us. Proverbs chapter 13. A sluggard's appetite is never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. Or in Proverbs 24, I walked by the field of a lazy person, the vineyard of one with no common sense. I saw that it was overgrown with nettles. It was covered with weeds, and its walls were broken down. Then, as I looked and thought about it, I learned, there's that word again, learned. I learned this lesson. A little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. Scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. So I'd caution you to think twice about subscribing to the idea that contentment is just about living easy and lazy. Along those same lines, contentment is not defined by a lack of ambition. Think about this. Your company is looking to promote someone from within. And in their discussion, they say, well, this guy has been around for 20 years, but you know what? He's just happy with where he is. He's content with living where he is. He's content in doing the job that he's doing. He does it well, but we just don't see him taking that extra step forward. Their contentment and a lack of ambition go hand in hand, where there just isn't much drive, and whoever is just perfectly happy to live by the status quo. I just don't think that's where Paul's going in Philippians. In fact, I think it's pretty much the exact opposite. Contentment with Paul comes with big aspirations. I think God puts on our hearts big goals and big dreams. These big aspirations that he is calling us to go forward to, and yet still be content at the same time. I found kind of an obscure example of this out of the Old Testament book of 1 Chronicles. I dug pretty deep here. And in it we read about this man named Jabez in chapter 4. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. And I just need you to just take a step back here, and I just thought this was funny. So those of you who have gone through the childbirthing process or know someone who's gone through the childbirthing process, you know this. You probably have names in your head, right? Oh, I know if it's a boy, it's going to be this. If it's a girl, it's going to be this. Jabez's mom probably had the same thing. But look at this again. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. His name is Pain. She named him Pain. That's a pretty cool name for a wrestler, but I don't know if that's a great name for a baby. You're just okay, Jabez, I feel you. There are only 3 verses about him here, so yeah, I digress, sorry. I just thought it was interesting. His name is Pain. Continues. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain. So Jabez is a landowner and he is wanting more land. He wants more power. He's asking God, give me more. And you'd think that ambition would get him in trouble with God. You'd think that the very next sentence, God would smack him down. But that's not what happens. The next verse says, and God granted his request. Does that mean that God grants our request every single time? Absolutely not. And I'm pretty sure in some way or another, all of us have asked God to bless us more, to give us more. And sometimes when you pray like this, God grants it. Not all the time, but sometimes he does. So I want you to understand in the scope of being content, we see that God is not upset at us for having big goals. So that this idea of contentment, or just being happy with where you are in life and not really worrying about asking God to be a part of your plans, I don't think that that's where Paul's going either. Contentment, as we've pointed out, is not a life of rainbows and unicorns. It's not a life living the easy life or a lazy life. And I don't think it's a life with a lack of ambition. So then what is it? What does Paul say about it? I think in Philippians chapter 4, we're clued into exactly what Paul sees as contentment in life. I would put this forward to you that Paul says that contentment is the assurance that God is at work in your current situation. No matter what's happening, good or bad, God is at work. And Paul describes this to us, that no matter what's happening, God has been at work in his life. I think that's what he's leaning toward, understanding what a life of contentment is. That whatever you're going through, that God's got it. If you belong to him, God's got it. If you're having a bad time, God's got it. If you are having a great time, God's got it. Contentment is trusting in the assurance that God has got it. That God is at work in each and every situation in your life. And if Paul is thinking this in his mind, that through the text, the next statement that he makes, Philippians 4:13, starts to make a little bit more sense. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. If we look at this verse through the lens of Paul's understanding of what contentment is, we understand that if God is at work in all situations, then God will carry me through anything he calls me to. That God will carry me through whatever he calls me to. Think about this in your own life. Think about the places that you're called. It's more than a career. It's more than being a mom or dad, or being a husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend, or a friend or a coworker or a member of the family. See, you go throughout your life and you have many different roles. And whatever that is for you, whatever God has called you to, think about this through the lens of Philippians 4:13. Whatever roles that God has called you to, he will carry you through. When you receive bad health news, when you lose your job, when you have something going on in your family dynamic, God will carry me through whatever he calls me to. And to understand that and to embrace that kind of living is freeing. And you start seeing, like, how can Paul have such a great outlook on life when he's just dealing with a lot of difficult circumstances? It's because he believes that God will carry him through whatever he has called him to. But we live in a world today where the joy that we feel in life, where our hope and our contentment is easily lost because of ourselves, because of the world that we live in around us, because of greed, because of entitlement, because of selfishness, because we're always comparing ourselves to others. The list goes on and on as to why we feel discontent. Because of our sin, we lose sight of the contentment that God has designed for us, that Paul displays to us since the beginning. We think about what we have, we think about what we don't have. We think about how we can get ahead in life, who we can push down. Remember last week we talked about that pecking order, and we're like, who can we push down the pecking order so that we can get higher on the pecking order? We think about this, and that all fuels our discontentment. So as we look at Philippians, again this week, I'd ask you to pray over this question. What are the areas in my life where I have a tendency to allow discontentment to creep in? What are those things in my life that trick me into a false sense of contentment? And I want you to think about these questions with an eye toward the secret that Paul tells his reader in Philippians 4. The key to living a life of contentment. Embracing that idea that Jesus will carry me through whatever he calls me to. And he hands this to us in Philippians 4:13. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And you think about the very beginning, we know that this verse is not about success. This verse is not about us getting ahead in life. It's about fully understanding that the God who made me, the God who redeemed me, is with me and has got it all the time. And he will carry me through whatever he calls me to. In this room, we have moms and dads and sons and daughters. We have husbands and wives. We have boyfriends, girlfriends. We have family and friends. Some of you are carpenters or engineers or teachers. You maybe work full-time or part-time. Some of you work with people. Some of you work with animals. You have people who sit behind desks, or you have people who work outside all the time. Some of you have devoted your entire lives to raising your kids. And for now, that is what God has called you to. But Paul makes it clear that your present circumstances are temporary. But the greater calling that each of us have in our lives remains very centered on one thing: Jesus. Paul's whole life, his entire existence, and as we've seen in Philippians throughout the last couple weeks, Paul's whole life centers on one thing and one thing alone, and that's Jesus. In worshiping him, in honoring him. His life, think about it. He was chained to prison guards, and he was just he couldn't help but share the gospel with the people that he was chained to. He devoted his entire life to sharing the gospel message with anyone he came in contact with. Remember the first chapter of Philippians. He says, to live is Christ and to die is to gain. Paul so clearly wanted his life to shine Christ's light into the world. For Paul, that means he had to learn how to live a life of contentment. He had to learn to live a life with Christ in wealth. He had to learn to live with Christ in poverty. He had to learn a life for Christ in all places and in all times, in good times and in bad times. And church, my prayer for you today is that as you walk through Philippians, you begin to walk in Paul's footsteps. That you adopt a life learning how to live for Christ in your family, with your friends, in your workplaces, at home. No matter where you are, no matter how you feel, that you can adopt this life of learning how to live for Christ. Fully understanding that no matter what, he's got it. That whatever he's going to call you to in your life, he will carry you through it. And we have been promised through Paul's words, we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. Wherever you are, whatever you're struggling with, whatever you're wrestling with today, Paul says, all you have to do is trust that whatever God's going to call you to, God's going to carry you through. That's life of contentment. Living in that mindset is a life of contentment. That is a life lived with Christ. For we can do all things through him who gives us strength. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the many blessings in our lives, God. We come before you today and we want to be drawn closer to you. We want to experience a heart of contentment that you have designed for us. But we confess to you that things get in the way of that. The ways of this world confuse us by its definitions of contentment. I just pray, create in us a clean heart, O God. Direct our hearts toward a posture of learning to live a life for Christ in all things, and in all places, and in all roles, in all circumstances of our life. Like Paul, we want our eyes to be constantly drawn up to Christ, because it's in Christ we experience joy and hope and unity and contentment. Lord, we ask you to continue to bless our time in Philippians. Let Paul's joy and contentment be our joy and our contentment. We love you, God. We ask all of this in your Son's name. Amen.